Hello and welcome to lecture number 21 of this series, and today's lecture will be about green materials. And to go back to my previous tradition of having a fragrance for every lecture, in this one there's an absolutely indispensable fragrance that needs to be associated with green materials, and that is Balmain's famous Vent Vert, which means green wind in French, and which really is the fragrance that introduced a very intense green note into perfumery. This was composed by Germaine Cellier, who was an extraordinary woman, a model, something of a socialite, a brilliant perfumer, and quite a tough, difficult person apparently. Although, you know, it may mean that she was surprisingly just as difficult as every other guy. Germaine Cellier worked for a firm called Roux post-war, and she at one point even had her own subsidiary of Roux in which she could work undisturbed and with her own small crew. And she was a perfumer of absolutely extraordinary talent. And her style of perfumery was very brutal, very sort of direct and strange, and certainly not what was considered feminine at the time. She did Bandit, she did Fracas, she did Monsieur Balmain, and Vent Vert famously. And Vent Vert is a floral fragrance, rose and jasmine, but it starts with an absolutely stonking note of Galbanum, which is the green material. And we'll come back to Galbanum in a minute when I smell it. And this made it, in its time, absolutely path-breaking fragrance. In fact, many green fragrances have, of course, been done since, but none quite as strikingly green as Vent Vert. The only one I can think of that comes up close to that is Alliage by Estée Lauder, and it does have a big Galbanum top note, and it is clearly an homage to Balmain's Vent Vert. So what exactly is a green smell? Well, if you smell cis-3-hexenal, which is what I'm dipping right now, what you get is a very aggressive smell, which smells like cut grass. So any of you who've had, for example, a grass juice, where they take the grass from a little square of turf and they slice it up, and then they make a small shot of green juice out of it. If you've ever had that, you will know what an extraordinary, intense smell cut grass can generate. And when you swallow it and you get the retronasal smell, I think it's the most intense flavor experience I've ever had. And it's very much like this. It's sort of aggressive, slightly oily, peppery, and ultimately very reminiscent of cut grass. Now, why should that be? Well, so cis-3-hexenal is the best known of what are called green leaf volatiles, which are molecules secreted and emitted by plants when injured. And they serve as a warning to other plants around them that the injury may be coming, and also as a deterrent to insects and pests. So basically, cis-3-hexenal is the equivalent of a scream from plants. And it really does, as a matter of fact, smell like that. It's got a tremendous intensity, not particularly pleasant, but it cuts through. It's like a car horn. Cis-3-hexenal, rather crude, but very very effective. Now, the note that Germaine Cellier used in Vent Vert was not hexenal, but another green note. Now I'm just getting it from here. Wow. This is Galbanum, and Galbanum is a extract of a plant. It's a resin, and it contains a variety of molecules. The smell of Galbanum is so intense and so high-pitched that it's almost unbearable. What does it smell like? It smells definitely resinous, intensely green like the hexenal, but more, even higher in intensity, without the aldehydic rasp, without the wah of aldehydes, much more whistly, so to speak, and with a definite sort of almost camphoraceous aspect, or incense-like aspect to it as well. It's as if you have a background of resin with the green note thrown in, but the green note is incredibly strong and beautiful. This thing is not easy to use in fragrance because it's not just a top note. It lasts quite a bit, and if the dosage is everything, because it can basically take over a fragrance very easily. It is absolutely wonderful. The third one is Styrallyl acetate, which is an ester, and therefore you expect it to have a fairly civilized fruity smell, because that's what esters do. And indeed, compared to Galbanum and Cis-3-hexenal, it's practically friendly. It has, at first, when you first smell it, what's striking about it is it has an odd combination of fruity and animalic. It smells a little bit like horses, like the fur of a horse. So there's a kind of definite animalic aspect to it. But also like chewing gum, the fruity, minty aspect of chewing gum. So it's a sort of strange tutti frutti horse. Almost a rhubarb character. There's an acid aspect to Styrallyl acetate, which is quite wonderful. This was used, if my memory serves me, as a top note in a famous fragrance, which I've already talked about, called Émeraude by Coty. And it's very interesting because Styrallyl acetate can substitute for citrus in Orientals as a top note. And in fact, Maurice Roussel used it in a perfume that is perhaps not as well known as it should be, called Lyra by Alain Delon. You wouldn't expect Alain Delon perfumes to be necessarily much good, but when they're composed by Maurice Roussel, they are. And when Maurice Roussel showed me Lyra, I said, but wait, that's Émeraude. And he said, what? And then he went back and smelled Émeraude. And he came back to me and said, yeah, that's amazing. I reinvented Émeraude without knowing it. And the top note of both of them had an oriental base, but the top note was Styrallyl acetate. So where Guerlain chose citrus, Coty and Maurice Roussel independently chose this acidic and arguably fresh, but not citrus top note. And it's a very interesting combination. You don't feel that it's used perhaps as much as it should be. In my opinion, it's a great material. So the fourth material I'm going to be smelling today is called Undecavertol. And this is very much a leafy, almost tobacco-y grain. It smells like tea leaves in the teapot after you've drained out the tea, if you smell the inside of a teapot. Or indeed, wet leaves on the ground. It's very smooth and pleasant, and you can imagine it being used to sharpen, to so to speak, give a slightly more angular texture to some otherwise soft composition. It's a very beautiful material. It smells very natural. This is the unusual thing. It's an aroma chemical, but it smells really convincingly like the smell of something in nature. The fifth material I'm going to smell today is Triplal, also known as ligustral. At least that's the name I knew it by, but it's now called Triplal. Now, Triplal is very much a sort of whoa. Whew. It's very much in the direction of cis-3-hexenal, but if anything, even more aggressive and really much less natural. It's got a in the middle distance, it has a plasticky feel to it, and slightly camphoraceous feel. It's intensely green, very much like hexenal, intensely aldehydic, aggressive green note, slightly gassy and unpleasant, and with that plasticky aspect. I think this works much better in composition than it does by itself, and it's a very useful material that you find absolutely everywhere because of the powerful aldehyde. And aldehydes are always useful because they add brilliance to a fragrance. And this one is longer lasting than the cis-3-hexenal, which is fairly transient. The sixth material, green material, that I'm going to smell today is Stemone. And it's a little bit of an outlier in this company because, yes, it's green, but it's a very specific note. It's very distinctive. And it is one of the character impact materials of the smell of fig tree. Fig leaves and unripe figs have this smell. So what's interesting about Stemone is that much of its character is carried by the oxime group, NOH. And oxime is one of those functional groups that I talked about in the previous series of lectures that impart a given smell character to whatever molecule they're found on. And the oxime smell character is camphoraceous, definitely, and green in equal parts. And oddly, that is the character of figs. Now, it's odd that something that's as sweet as figs in the mouth. Right now we have fig trees outside the house that are giving an amazing harvest of figs. And figs are intensely sweet. And somehow the contrast between the intense sweetness of the flesh of the fruit and the bitter green smell of the skin and the leaves is one of the really attractive aspects of figs. So Stemone, because the character of the oxime is so intense, is not used necessarily all that much in perfumery because it tends to say figs immediately when you put it in a fragrance. So it's used definitely in fig fragrances, and there have been quite a few. But other than that, as a green note, it's kind of hard to handle. And the last material in the green series is Spirogalbinone. Whoa, very strange stuff, this one. Now, the word spiro, when applied to an aroma chemical, typically means that you have a carbon which joins two rings, so that carbon is connected to four carbons, and the rings touch each other by a point, and that carbon is at the point. That's a spiro linkage. You find spiro linkages in thiaspiranes, which are very intense, woody, fruity notes. And in this particular instance, Spirogalbinone gives you a sort of galbanum type effect, arguably. To me, it has an unquestionable intense green character and nicely transparent without the rasp of aldehydes. But it also, especially after smelling all the others, because you tend to desensitize to what they have in common, it has quite a pronounced wet fur, wet dog character, which I hadn't actually smelt before, I hadn't noticed before. And it's really quite strikingly like wet dog. I had a friend who had a Cocker Spaniel who would love to go swimming and come out and then shake off all the water next to us. And that beast smelled kind of like this, actually. I make it sound worse than it is. It's actually a very interesting smelling molecule, but it does have a wet dog character, so unquestionable. So all these molecules have a sort of a nostalgic aspect for me because when I first got interested in olfaction, I was really struck by the fact that there was a very sharp difference in smell character between hexanal, which smells fatty, aldehydic, aggressive, acrid, and hexenal, which has this green cutgrass character. So at the time, I became obsessed with the idea that there was, so to speak, such a thing as the smell of a double bond, since the only difference between hexanal and hexenal is the presence of a cis double bond in cis-3-hexenal. So this idea that you could smell a double bond started a whole train of thought which lasted for months until I realized that I was barking up the wrong tree, which was, can one smell a double bond when one cannot touch it? So is it possible to have a molecule that has a double bond inside it that is out of reach, so to speak, of any receptor that might be touching it, but nevertheless could still be detected by its vibrations using the tunneling mechanism that I proposed for olfaction? And so I got really into this, and I came across a series of compounds with the wonderful name of between anines. Between anines. And these are compounds in which you have a carbon-carbon double bond, and then on either side of this double bond you have a ring of carbons protecting that core double bond of the molecule. And these are really hard to make, and they're completely non-trivial chemistry. In fact, I'm not even sure you can. In fact, I'm pretty sure you can't buy them. And I thought it was very exciting that you could have a molecule with a double bond in the middle that couldn't be reached from any direction, in fact, completely unreactive. And I thought, wow, it would be interesting to know if it smells of double bonds. So at the time I contacted the chemist who made this stuff, and I said, does it smell of double bonds? And of course, he had no idea what I was talking about. And then I realized that in any event, because they put 10 carbons on each side to make the rings, this thing was way too large to have any smell whatsoever. And so I sort of gave up on it. But I still have fond memories of this obsession of mine of smelling double bonds. And I still believe that there's something in it. It's not 100% clear which of the vibrations of double bond compounds is different, but you will notice that all of these compounds, in particular the galbanum material, contains dodecatrienes, which have plenty of double bonds. They have 3 double bonds. All of them have double bonds. So there may still be something in that particular idea that actually the grain character is conferred by vibrations that are associated with double bond. There may be something around 1,000 or 1,100 wave numbers. It's kind of hard to say, and there are complexities to it because some of these are large molecules, so they will bind to a narrower set of receptors. But basically, these are manifestations of vegetation complaining about being cut. So they are a natural scream.